Currently, Dr. Carter is an assistant professor at American University in the Department of Justice, Law, and Criminology, an affiliate scholar with Urban Institute, and a non-residence fellow at the Brookings Institution, both in Washington, D.C. She has also received funding from the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Carter's research has been presented to practitioners and academicians at conferences such as the American Society of Criminology, the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences, and the American Sociological Association, and published in journals including Race and Justice, Sociological Forum, and Deviant Behavior. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Carter, and I'd like to give you a warm welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you. So we'll just go ahead and get started for the Q&A. Quick reminder for all of our attendees today, we do have an audience Q&A towards the end for the last 10 to 20 minutes, but if you'd like to put your questions in the Q&A feature using the button at the bottom of your screen, feel free to do so now and we'll get to them at the end. So I kind of want to start off talking a little bit about your background first and then transition to some more of your recent work. So as we saw in your bio, you were a deputy corrections officer in Savannah, Georgia, where you supervised male and female residents with diverse classification statuses. Could you please tell us a little bit more about what you did there and what this role means?
What being a correctional officer means?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I worked as a correctional officer in Savannah, Georgia. It's a jail. The difference between a jail and a prison is that people who are convicted to over a year sentence go to prison. A year or less, you go to jail. Of course, there are some cases where that's not the case. For example, if you get convicted of murder and you appeal that case, you go back and forth to court from a jail, not from prison, right? So if you're on appeal, you end up in a jail. So jail supervise males and females. I supervised men in lockdown, also called administrative segregation, also called the hold. This depends on where you are. That means 23 hours in your cell, 1 hour out if you're lucky. I say if you're lucky because it's not a guaranteed hour out. So 23 hours in, 1 hour out. So I supervised men on lockdown, females on lockdown, and females that were in general population, and also females with mental health issues. So I did that in between undergrad and graduate school. What does being a correctional officer mean? It means that you supervise people who are either detained, accused, or convicted of an offense, and that requires training. Across the United States, it's not kind of a common or a standard way to train correctional officers. So you can be in training for as little as 2 weeks or as long as 3 months. To be a correctional officer, New York State having the longest, the 3-month away camp to be a correctional officer. So training varies greatly. Some people consider correctional officers kind of glorified babysitters. Other people consider correctional officers on par with police officers. It just depends. Correctional officers do go through the same academy that police officers go through, but not right away, right? The academy is mandatory for police officers to begin. That's not true with corrections. Corrections, you can be a correctional officer, and then once 6 months to a year goes by, depends on jurisdiction, then you can go in the academy. So there are some differences, and a lot of people use corrections as a stepping stone to become a police officer.
Thank you so much for that. Kind of following up, I'm a little bit curious. You kind of mentioned some of the differences between being a police officer and a correctional officer. Do correctional officers and police officers, do they kind of view these differences in a really big light? Like, do you find that there's a huge difference between a police officer and a correctional officer, or in the eyes of inmates, do they sort of treat them differently?
I don't understand the question. What are you asking in the perspective of a cop or a perspective of a confined person? Using inmate, we don't, the field corrections officers still use inmates, but academics don't. It's considered a derogatory term. So, which for better or for worse, just giving you the information. I was socialized as a correctional officer, so I still use that word oftentimes, but the academy is going away from it. So what's the question? Is it how incarcerated people feel about police officers versus correctional officers, or is it how police officers feel about correctional officers? What's your question?
Yeah, from the perspective of an incarcerated individual, how would they feel about police officer versus a correctional officer?
Everybody's 12. Everybody's 5-0. So it's always a us versus them mentality. It just shifts to guards.
I see. Okay. Thank you for explaining and telling me the difference, because I wasn't aware myself of the difference between inmate and incarcerated individual. So I kind of want to transition a little bit into something that we've done here at JEP. We recently wrote a book that was kind of a starter guide on how to get into criminal justice advocacy. And in the book, we hear from exonerees and previously incarcerated individuals about their experiences in the carceral system. So I was wondering if we could get your input, coming from somebody who was obviously a deputy corrections officer. How are these sort of differing outcomes between Black and Brown folk and their white counterparts as seen as a deputy corrections officer just in the day-to-day life?
It just, well, it depends on jurisdiction, but generally there are more Black and brown people locked up than white people, generally. So just the numbers are different.
Do you find, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, ask a question.
I was just wondering, do you find that a lot of the times the inmates kind of like form different niches or cliques or things like that? Because in a lot of our research, we were sort of finding that that was the case.
Well, so for example, in the state of California, the Department of Corrections actually got sued and lost, because what happened is people would enter into the prison system to be incarcerated, and they were put into different sections of the prison by race. And the court ruled that that was discrimination. But for corrections, it was for protection, because gangs are so bad in certain jurisdictions that separation is actually a security issue. That there are white gangs, Black gangs, Latinx gangs that do have these prejudices and racial sentiments against other people. And so while the institution of corrections viewed it as a safety issue, the court ruled it as, discriminatory and unconstitutional. So it really depends on where you are in the United States. Every facility doesn't have intense gang problems, but it is true for larger, higher security facilities. So it just depends on where you are. So people usually don't click up. It's not like high school cafeteria. You don't just sit where you want to sit, because you are clicking up for safety, right? You need friends for safety. And so it's a very different environment. Prisons and jails are very different environments. So.
Thank you so much for that. Next thing I wanted to talk about was transitioning a little bit more into your current teaching role, where you discuss a lot of the inherent biases within the criminal justice system. I'm curious as to how these two roles differed, and kind of what's your take on corrections officers now, as you've taught more and researched more about the impact of one's identity on crime and justice outcomes?
No change, really. No difference in the way I feel about correctional officers. My experience as a correctional officer has shaped my research more than my research shaping my views of being a correctional officer. It's often because books don't do it. Books aren't enough, guys. What you're reading is not true. It's all crap. That's not true. It's just not the way it works. It's not the way real life works. Real life doesn't work the way we're not writing the way real life is. And so whatever you're learning in class and college, unless you get somebody who actually has done the job, then you're going to get a filtered down version. If it's coming straight from a book, it's going to be missing something. So for example, I've sat in classes when I was still a student, and somebody's like, yeah, it's unfair. There was this inmate who lost their mother, and they were just being consoled by their friend, and they got in trouble and they got put in a hole just because they hugged each other because that person lost their mom. And everybody's like, oh, that's so messed up. And I'm like, yeah, they should have went to the hole. No hugging. No hugging. Why? Because the law says no hugging, right? A hug is considered physical contact. Physical contact is against the law in prison and jail because folks get raped. So it doesn't matter the occasion, it's against the law, right? So what you can't decipher that. It's not my job as an officer to say, oh, this is a romantic hug versus a platonic hug versus a consoling hug. That's just not what we do. It's just no hugging, right? There's no such thing as consent for sex in prison or jail at all. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as consensual sex. So the consequences of that is that everything is a no, right? And that's one of the deprivations of being incarcerated in this country. You can't get a hug to be consoled. And it's a horrible thing. When I was a correctional officer, I actually experienced something very similar. There was a woman who was waiting for a visit from her kid and her sister, and they never came, and she was really concerned. And on the news that night, we all watched the news every night, and on Fox News, we found out that they were on their way to see her, and they got in a car accident and they passed away. And it was very upsetting, even for me. I'm a person with emotions. Nevertheless, there's no hugging, right? And that's the piece that's missing. If you've never tasted chow, which is what we call every meal in jail or prison, you never tasted it, you can't really talk about it. People, oh, I found a screw in my food. You would think that having screws in your food is against the law. It's not. Georgia and Alabama have ruled, their courts have ruled that you can have foreign objects in your food, but that's not unconstitutional, right? And so what we think is right or wrong actually isn't the way the law manifests itself and the way we enforce the law. And so by no means has working in the academy changed the way I see COs. Actually the reverse, because the academy is missing so many pieces of what happens in real life. Yeah, so it was actually pretty frustrating when I went back to grad school, and I was like, this is all a farce because none of this is accurate.
Wow, I don't even think I'm aware of half of the things that go on in prisons. If this is the reality that some people aren't even realizing, then it's quite shocking that we can even claim to advocate for something that we don't really know the full extent of. So Marissa,
Yeah.
I'll pass it off to you.
I go back and forth with my students a lot. So for example, a lot of my students are super impassioned about abolition. There should be no prison. Or a lot of my students are super impassioned about no solitary confinement. Super impassioned. And my response is, okay, so what do you do if somebody throws shit on you? What happens to that person? If every time you try to feed them, you get feces thrown on you? Who, first of all, what other person, should they have a cellmate? If they're throwing poop, as a sane person, I'm not talking about mentally ill, as a sane person, if they're throwing poop because they do not want to be incarcerated onto other people, should they have a cellmate?
I'm guessing the answer is no.
Right?
Yeah.
So this idea of no solitary confinement at all is actually impractical because we don't even understand, I think broader society doesn't understand the conditions that people are actually facing in prison and how people really don't want to be there. Like, no matter what color uniform you have on, you don't want to be in prison, period, full stop. If you're getting paid or not, full stop. And so to ask someone to work, so one of the major problems with incarceration today is that we don't have enough people to staff it, because you can't keep a correctional officer, you just can't. There are facilities that are losing 10 people a month. That's a lot of people. If you don't have full staffing, you can't do drug programs, you can't do parenting programs, you can't do GED, college programs, all the stuff that people say make prison great. We don't have people who want to work in prison. So it's not, they're not practical options. And so to say then that if you have we have sympathy for teachers who are understaffed, right? Oh, it's 50 people in my classroom, 100 people in my high school class. How do I live? And we have empathy for teachers. Nobody thinks about correctional officers in that way, right? And so it's just like, don't put them in solitary. And then another thing, abolition. Okay, so God forbid, but if somebody murdered any of your loved ones and there's no prison, what do we do with that person? Tell me what we do with them, right? But students don't think that far. It's just, this is wrong. It feels wrong. Morally, it's wrong. Ethically, but you need something. You need to do something with people who have decided to commit their lives to murdering other people. And there are people out there that exist that have committed their lives to murdering other people. And so it's really important. And that's what I teach in my classes. It's incredibly important that if you take something away from the system, that you can have a damn good replacement. Because we're talking about crime. We're not talking about love. Right? And so you have to think it all the way out. And that's what I get students to do.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, like, it's good that you talk to your students about these issues and like not only see their point of views, but they also hear your point of views. It's good to see like that they're comfortable with you and you're comfortable with them. But I kind of wanted to go into your last question, and you mentioned how physical contact is against the law. Can you describe like the impact of incarceration on families and incarcerated individuals' support systems? Research has found that most children whose parents are incarcerated are at higher risk for increased antisocial behaviors, which can lead to a ton of other things. So I'm not sure if you directly got to see this during your time as a correctional facilities to see how like this impacted, kids, spouses, and whatnot. But I would love to hear your point of view on this.
It's a natural thing. I mean, prison sentence is similar to death sentence in a lot of cases. It's the same trauma on families, the same missingness, but not only in families, on neighborhoods. Less people to work jobs, people aren't there for daddy-daughter dances, et cetera, the list goes on, right? And so it's a domino effect. So criminologists and sociologists study this stuff all the time. There are ideas that, at age of incarceration matters in terms of the level of impact it has on a child or a partner, whether or not people are cohabitating or just girlfriend, boyfriend matters, right? So your position or how you're connected to that person shapes the impacts. But so we found that it matters for children. Essentially, violence or crime is a cycle, and we can see how it moves and impacts people, not only the person impacted, but the people that surround the social network of that person. So scholarship backs that in different ways.
Yeah, it's so important. I feel like honestly there should be something in place maybe for children and families, like free therapy, something accessible for people that can't possibly afford it. But honestly, that's a great response. And just to circle back, from the top, like what made you originally want to go into this field of study?
I went to University of Pennsylvania for undergrad. For those of you on the call that might not know, so as an Ivy League institution, I got in pre-med because I thought I wanted to be a doctor and crack the helix, the DNA helix, that's what I'm talking about. And then in 2006, which is the year I started Penn, they cracked the helix. And I was like uninterested. Also, bio required this interaction with like blood and animals and knives, and I really wasn't that interested in that either. And so criminology is taught differently at every institution. Criminology is not criminal justice. So the difference between is another pet peeve of mine. Criminal justice scholars study the system and its outcomes. Criminologists study the nature of crime. Why is there more crime in the summer than the winter? Why do people with brain injuries commit crime? Why do people who had whose parents abandoned them are more likely to commit crime? That's what criminologists do, right? So by default, criminologists study the system, but criminal justice scholars are not criminologists. So it doesn't work the other way. So all three of my degrees are the same thing, but it depends on when you take criminology, how it's offered. So at the University of Pennsylvania, right, at undergrad, criminology was a far more interdisciplinary degree. So I took classes in law, biology, psychology, sociology. I took different classes to build, of course, statistics and things, to build criminology as a discipline. That's unlike where I did my graduate degrees at the University of Delaware, where criminology is with the sociology department. So it's a study of people and the phenomena and the way people interact, but criminologists particularly talk about the phenomena of crime, right? And so depends on what institution you go to. Some criminology departments are with criminal justice departments, so they're combined. And so you'll get a criminologist who really understands the system really, really well and has less of maybe like the biological, right? So like how brain science, right? A lot of people don't have that. A lot of institutions don't offer that course, or like how the brain impacts crime. And so I chose the field because it was interdisciplinary and I happened to be good at law and I didn't have to choose, right? And that's what happens with freshmen. You come in, you think you know what you're doing, and then you realize you have no clue, right? And so that's a normal path of life. I was pre-med and I was like, not no more. The helix is cracked. It's not meant for me. So then I went to criminology. I will say, I think it was probably kind of meant to be. The stuff that I do now harkens back to my childhood. So I grew up disadvantaged. I'm first gen. I was in and out of homelessness a lot as a kid in high school and the whole time, but also especially in high school. And so studying race and crime in that way. Also, there was a period of my life where both of my parents worked at a group home. So I would leave my school and then go to a group home for girls. And so I was quickly made aware of what normal or good kids were like, and then where the bad kids go, right? And then as a kid to realize really no difference between good and bad kids, right? I played with good kids in the morning, I played with bad kids in the afternoon, right? And so really as a kid having to understand that being bad or being labeled as bad, the consequences of that and what it means to be locked up as a kid. I saw that really, really early in my life. So it wasn't in my psyche. I didn't know what a criminologist was when I was in high school. But eventually, as I was exposed to different things, it's the path that made the most sense.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think a lot of the ideas that you're talking about, like what's labeled as good and bad in society and like what that means for crime and criminal justice outcomes. So a lot of the stuff that we're reading about now, like for example, it's tied a lot to race with people kind of perceiving like white people as typically better and like African Americans and colored people and just BIPOC folk in general as like bad just because those are the people that are over criminalized and often overrepresented in our criminal justice system in jails and prisons and things like that. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about the role of race itself actually just like within the system. So we were reading that your ongoing research examines the theoretical explanations of accountability in the criminal justice system, especially the role of identity in criminal justice professions. A lot of our attendees might know kind of some of these statistics as 69.5% of correctional officers being white and 66.2% being male. Especially with the impact of colorism on the criminal justice outcomes that we've kind of been discussing, what made you want to pursue these types of research, especially with kind of the background that you've talked about?
What made me want? So one, you can't in this country, you can't. Well, really, in all countries, well, in the United States, you can't study crime without studying race. In all countries, you just can't study crime without studying color, right? Even though that's not what people say, they call it different things, right? In some countries, it's the caste system, and they tie it to money more. But people that have money get inside jobs. People that don't have money get outside jobs, so they get darker because they're in the sun, right? Even in post-racial countries like Brazil, Brazil's census captures colorism, right? Either if you are Moreno, right, or a mixed person, you have to check your color on the census. Even in Africa, right, where you think, oh, well, Africa has plenty of Black and brown people, can't be about color over there, but bleaching, super common, right, to bleach your skin. In Asia, one of the most homogenous countries, right, China, right, that people walk around with umbrellas to avoid being darker skinned, right? And so it's not something that maybe we think about immediately. We think about race more, particularly in the United States, because race is just kind of our crappy history, right? It's a fundamental part of the way we were founded, right? And it's something that I think as a country, as a nation, either we hold shame about, we're tired of talking about, it's exhausting, we realize it's bigger than us, so we get disheartened, but race is relevant. It's always relevant, particularly in the United States. So why did I decide to study race and crime? So I am a race scholar. So when you pursue a doctorate, and when you get a doctorate, you'll have to take these tests, right? They call them different things, comprehensive exams, qualifying exams, they call them different things, but you take them generally in 2 areas, and those are the areas that you get to say you're an expert in when you're done. And so I took one in race and one in criminology in theory. So I'm a theorist and a race scholar. Why did I choose to do race? The first reason, and the most honest reason, is because I am Black. And that people expect me to know the things about race, and not the things like, oh, well, you know, I grew up in New York, and that's not what people are. That's not why people pay me lots of money to talk to them, to tell me to say when I grew up in New York. No one cares about your personal experience at this level. So because I realized as a Black woman with a PhD in crime that people are going to ask me questions about race, whether or not I was a race expert, I figured might as well be a race expert. And I can tell you that the process to becoming a race expert was super depressing. Because one, I learned that, oh, this is not, I mean, I always knew that it wasn't just Black people involved, but to read about all people, all races, to read about immigration and how like people are like immigration, you know, they call it crimigration. That's what we call it in criminology, but how immigration and people who immigrate into this country are considered criminal because of their presence, right? So to read this about different people in different ways and how it happens, and even how, you know, Asian students in the model minority situation can turn that label can turn itself on its head and create kind of this racial resentment and kind of deviance amongst that population. There's no race that's not white that hasn't been labeled in some kind of way as criminal, and that's super depressing to read and then have to take a test on it. So I the first reason I became race expert was because of that. But a lot of people feel like race doesn't matter, it's not race. And that's not a bad thing, to think that, oh, it's not my race that matters. It's not a bad thing. Or I met people that you might look at and say, oh, that person is Black. And they're like, no, I'm not Black. I don't identify as Black. That's fine. If that's where you are, that's fine. Some people don't think it's race. Some people think it's class. Right? Something people don't think is race or class, they think it's education, right? So, but we know that all of these things are related to each other. The reason why in the United States, people often say that it's race is because of the way we were founded, right? Because there was no kind of, nobody was going to get a master's back in like 16 something, right? That wasn't what was happening. Right? That wasn't happening. And so the fact that now in modern society, we say, oh, it's X, Y, Z, but if the through line of the country since its founding, right, and even before we got on the boats, was race, right? And so that is why it's kind of an ever-present thing. But I am not an advocate of kind of pushing my students in either direction. You just give people information, help them think, and wherever they land, right? And so that is the job of any good faculty person: give information and let people think. But yeah, that is the connection between race and crime, unfortunately. And as a black woman, it's just something that you can't really ignore in my body.
Yeah, I mean, like you touched a little bit about like what the process was like for you, and that was super interesting because it actually goes into our next question. So what advice would you give students currently on this webinar who want to go through that same path and process as you did?
Yeah, that's a good question. One, you know, grades matter, but grades aren't the only thing that matters. So grades matter, do well in school, but it's not the only thing. If you get a C one time, you can write an essay about what was going on in your life where you got a C, right? If COVID really, you just couldn't get your focus back, like just write it up. Then you need to be a hell of a writer, but you can write your way out of that. So a lot of people in high school are like, oh my gosh, I got two C's, so I'm not even applying to Harvard, particularly Black and brown people. They're like, I'm not even gonna put, because I already know. And that's not how other people think. That's what we say, oh, I just don't know. Write your way out of it. Happens all the time. So, you know, a couple bad grades is not the end of the world. But then again, good grades make it easier, but a couple bad grades is not the end of the world. Bad SAT score is not the end of the world. I didn't get a perfect SAT score. It was good, but wasn't perfect. So don't worry about that. The next thing is like, you know, I know a lot of people like early on, like you come into college thinking like, this is it. I'm only doing this. And that really is limiting. That's gonna suck for you. And I just really invite people their first 2 years, even if you end up being right, fine, but I took a sign language class. I know how to go to the bathroom in sign language. Like, you need other things. And you think, oh, well, this is so random, it never connects. It does connect. As a faculty member, I've used sign language. I had no idea I was gonna be a faculty member when I was taking that class. I was just trying to get a quick couple credits and walk out. So I really invite you to not pigeonhole yourself. You never know, like you're the criminologist that stand out because know sign language a little bit. I don't put it on my resume because I don't want to be tested, but the point is it's helpful. The next suggestion is that you should, I think, interning or shadowing. I don't believe in doing anything for free though. And again, that's because I grew up super disadvantaged. So like people like, oh, I'm interning. How much you pay? Nothing. That wasn't me. I got paid for every single thing I did. I worked 2 jobs all through college. Now, was it sucky? Yes. But also that's the way I got to go to social things and parties. So I do invite you, if you didn't know, Penn is the party ivy. Every ivy has its name. But I needed to be a well-rounded person. And so I worked. But I would not suggest doing things for free. I do not suggest that at any stage of your life, actually, unless it's for the God that you serve. Outside of that, people should pay you, and you should get used to that very early in life so that when it's time to negotiate for real adult money, you're not scared, right? But doing everything for free up until you turn 22 and then like, I'm getting paid the big bucks, that's irrational. That's not rational thinking, but people don't think about that. They're just like, experience. Nah, don't let people play you like that. And if you really decide you want to be a doctor, I have to say that you need to like school. There's no way. There's just no way. If you don't like it, it's not going to work. You're going to hate it. Especially law school. And I'm going to say this loud because I know it's being recorded. I have so many friends that went to Penn with me and then went to law school and are now not lawyers. And they just, law school is like the default option because you can major in anything and then go to law school. English, law school, business, law school, crim, law school, social, law school, psych, law school. Don't go to law school unless you're sure, okay? Like, get it out your head unless you're absolutely sure. Okay, so we said that. But back to the doctorate thing. If you want a doctorate, you need to like school. You need to understand that you have to have delayed gratification. I was in school a total of 21 years before I made adult money. Graduate students, you want to go to a grad school that pays you to go to school. That is possible. I did not pay for my last 2 degrees at all. And so you get paid to go to school. You get paid pennies, right? I got paid 16. I think now doc students at AU get paid like $19,000 a year. Not a lot of money, but you can live. I lived through it and now I make adult money. But you're not going to get paid like loads and loads, but it's free school. Think about all the tuition money they're paying and combine that, and it'll make you feel better. But you don't get paid a lot of money, but you can make it through. And you just ask other people how they make it through, right? You don't get paid a lot of money. You need to like it. You also need to know that whatever you're studying isn't the only thing you'll ever study. And so like a lot of people, oh my gosh, my dissertation has to be perfect. Everything has to be perfect. You're not gonna hopefully you're not gonna pass away as soon as you submit the paper. So like you're a researcher, like you just research other things whenever you want. For example, I want to research why it's deviant to walk during prayer during church. Like, why is that a crime? There's no rules in church. So why can't I walk during prayer? Like, I don't want to understand how church controls us without controlling us. There are no cops there, but you feel like you can't do anything, Fascinating to me. Not studying it right now, but later on I'll study it, right? So it's also, I think, a lot of my students, my master's students, my undergrad students, my doctoral students, which I teach all the levels now. And that's one thing that I find that students do often. They're like, I have to get this right the first time. And that's just not life. That's not life. It's like having a good hair day every day. It's not a thing. So I don't know why we put this pressure on ourselves, right? And so those are my suggestions. Just make sure that you love school. If you're going to be a doctor, like make sure you really just love it. You need to love it.
Yeah, no, this is all amazing advice. You know, I think majority of us want to go to law school. Like personally, I'm in between either med or law, which is extremely weird because they're two completely different fields, but a lot of us are like interested in law. So this was amazing to hear, like not to limit ourselves, to be open-minded when going into college. I'm currently a high school student, so I'm actually applying to college right now. So this was all amazing. Thank you. And just to go more in depth about, you know, your work at American University, what classes do you currently teach? Again, we have some members who are interested and or even attend American University and would love to hear your point of view about the university itself as well as how they can get involved with you.
Yeah, so I'll start the first thing first. So I teach introduction to criminology. I teach critical issues in justice, where every week we talk about like a sexy thing. So like police brutality one week, you know, like sex crimes another week, right? Every week is a different, it's just kind of like a 100 level kind of introductory course. Introduction to criminology is a 200 level course that talks about the theories of crime. So why people commit crime. Is it because of their mama and daddy? Is it because they ain't got no money? Right. So that's what we talk about in that class, different explanations for why people engage in crime, which is a super helpful. I just gave a class to some aspiring lawyers at Georgetown, and it was a theory class, and they're like, why isn't this in law school? Because that's not a lawyer's job. It's our job over here where I live. But I teach intro to criminology, critical issues in justice. I teach race and justice. That's at the master's and doctoral level. That's a 600 level course. I teach criminological theory. I'm the theorist. That's a doc course. I teach, there's another one. Cities and crime, neighborhoods and crime, like crime that happens in neighborhoods. All of this is listed on my AU site. It's so obnoxious to say you could just Google me, but you can if you need a list. But what I think about American in general, and so this is a really good question. So the way, and if you don't know, just generally the way universities and colleges work in the United States, so it's like, you know, that song is levels to everything, is levels to right? And so it's levels, right? And antiquated, they don't judge them, they don't rank them like that anymore, but probably what your parents are familiar with is kind of like this Carnegie Mellon evaluation, R1, R2, R3, R4, so research level institution. So R1, obviously you have your Ivies, MIT, University of Delaware, right? These Georgia State, Florida State, right? These kind of heavily researched universities. Usually these universities have their own law schools, have their own med schools. Their libraries, when you go on campus visits, you can usually tell when people have escalators in their libraries, multiple levels, that's a sign it's an R1, okay? It's some money over there, right? And then R2s, right? R2s, American is an R2, and really it means that's the level of intensive research, right? American has its own law school, but what happens is as you go up in research intensity, sometimes you go down in what I guess student facing services. So there's an expectation when you show up on an Ivy's campus as a student that you got your stuff together, that you are like, even though there's support services, generally there's an expectation that you can go. Very different from a community college where oftentimes they offer, right, these remedial courses, how to study, how to be a student. There's not going to be a lot of classes at Harvard that tell you how to be a student and how to study. There's an expectation that you can figure it out. And so that's what I mean. When you go up in research intensity, you go down oftentimes in those kind of how to get ready, how to be a student, how to live your life, right? So that's kind of this zigzag. So R2 is where American is. And so still very heavily researched, but what they call it is a scholar teacher model is what I follow. So it's important that I'm just as good as a scholar as I am as a teacher. That's not true at R1s. They care more that you're a better scholar. You don't have to be a great teacher. You don't have to be a great teacher at Harvard. So if you see people, like you might see lectures where people like they got old guys with glasses standing at the podium, just basically talking to themselves, right? Because, but they like cured cancer, because you don't have to be a good teacher. You don't have to be. You cured cancer. You don't have to be a good teacher. And then there are people at R2s that, yeah, you're working on curing cancer too, but the way the university assesses you is also, how are your students learning? So you might not have time to cure 3 types of cancer, maybe just 1, because all your other time is going into how your students are learning. And so that is kind of like this seesaw, right? And so, and of course, there are different levels. It goes further down. I've only ever been on, as a professional, I've only ever interacted with R1s and R2s. So I can't, and I don't want to like disparage other levels of institutions, but because it all just depends on the support that you need. There are some institutions that are not research institutions at all. They are teaching institutions. And so all of their focus is going to go to students and to making sure that the students are achieving those goals. And faculty do not get evaluated by whether or not they're curing cancer, because that's not the purpose of that institution. The purpose of that institution is to make sure they teach and that they teach well. Right? And so it's about fit. And so some students who feel like, some people feel like, oh, well, you know, I feel like if I go to a huge institution, I'll get lost. So they need a smaller campus. And so it's about you really knowing yourself. It's not as much like, oh, well, I have to go to Harvard. Like, breathe off of that, because Harvard might not have support services that you need. And so it's important that you like really say, like, what kind of scholar am I, or what kind of student am I? What kind of support do I need? What did I have in high school that I want to have again in college, or I wish I had? So I need that for college. And you make that kind of list when you're looking at universities. Like I said, America's scholar teacher model. So I have to be a great scholar and I have to be a great teacher. And so when you can, if you want to stalk me on, was it ratemyprofessor.com? Like you can see, it's like fair but firm, not playing any games. You have to read in order. If you do not read, you will not succeed. All these like mottos under my name, because it's a push, but also support at the same time. So that's what I aim for as a faculty person at American. I do think it's a great location. Obviously, it's Washington, D.C. We have an excellent law school. We have amazing opportunities for internships. So one of my first mentees, one of the first letter of recommendations I wrote was for a woman, when she grown, a woman to intern at Kamala Harris's office, and she got it. While she was still a senator. So it's a very common thing for people to be on the Hill. It's very common for people to, you know, have a black suit, a gray suit, a blue suit, you know, that's all common. And it's a part of the culture at American. So if that is important to you, then you can find that at AU's campus. I think it's unique because we care about students so much. I know it sounds corny. And I can also say, you know, it's a little annoying, right? Because I have other things to do. And so, you know, I'm writing a book, I'm getting grants, I'm doing research, I'm going to prison, you know, every month. And I still have to answer all these emails super fast, or else people are going to think I don't care about them. So it is, as a human being, it is an ask. And sometimes I'm like, hey, if I was at Penn, I wouldn't have to worry about all of this. If it take me 3 days to answer email, oh well, right? That's how it works at some institutions. They'll relax, you know, that's not priority. But at AU, it is a priority, and they do want us to kind of make sure that students are at the pace that they need to be. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I think we're getting a lot of like action in our like general Slack for JEP. A lot of people are very interested in that. So thank you for the answer. And I'm sure a lot of people are taking that into account. I do want to transition a little bit into the audience Q&A because we do have a couple of questions. The first question we have is, from your perspective, do you believe forensic psychology analysis plays a big role in multiple criminal cases? And if so, in what ways?
No. The answer is no. And I'm glad you asked that question, because that is the second most common thing outside of law, is people who are in love with, what's that TV show? The one with
I think it's Criminal Minds is what they're thinking.
Yes, Criminal Minds. Oh geez, Louise. Okay, no, it's not. No. I think forensic psychologist does not get called in on a vast majority of cases. Vast majority. We're talking about, if it was a percentage, maybe like 4 to 6%.
Oh, wow.
At the most. That's because that level, like what you think about analysts and like the way that works on that particular show, like detectives do, maybe like a detective, like you said on First 48, they do a very watered down version of that, right? Extremely watered down, a diluted version, but it's still a similar thing, right? When you've been in the field 30, 40, even 20 years, there's patterns that you observe that you can say, we know now that, if a woman is murdered, for example, it's more than likely someone she knows. And we can, make these connections and cross out people, and that it comes as a kind of a logical process of elimination. You don't call in a forensic psychologist before you do all the basics, right? And then oftentimes in a lot of jurisdictions, they don't have the resources to call in the BCU. It just doesn't. So no. And I usually try to make that gentler. Like when I first started teaching, I used to say that nicer, but then I realized like that people, like my students, and eventually you guys, even if I never teach you or see you in real life, you need to like do something that's going to give you a real job, right? And so while acquiring those skills are amazing, working at the FBI, possible interning, I know students who've done it. One of my best friends did it. Like all of these opportunities exist, but is it like TV? No, it's not at all. And it doesn't pop up as often, perhaps as it should. You can argue that, oh, it should be XYZ, but no, nobody has like a jet on by, so you can call in the people on the jet. Like it's not normal. No. Mm-mm.
I think that's a reality check. Huh?
It doesn't mean don't pursue it. You can pursue it, get the skills, but just be open is what I was saying before. Like for people with the skills of a forensic psychologist can also be, and this is more commonly called on, like someone who consults in the lawyers in a courtroom trial. That's more common. Can you evaluate this person to see if they are capable of standing trial and defending themselves or XYZ, right? So it's a similar skill set. So get the skills, and maybe you always want to do that job, but you also can do this job or that. So knowing that those skills can be applied to a bunch of jobs and not just get that one single job and that TV show, especially that TV show, out of your head. Like just have multiple jobs that those skills can fill, so that when you get your degree, you're not one of those people that's like, the system screwed me. College doesn't mean anything. I'm working the same way everybody else is working. You have to think these skills can go to a bunch of different things, right? So
you hear that, everybody? TV shows aren't all real. Thank you for that. I think that was a reality check for some people. But definitely like the information that you can use for other careers, I think that's like helpful and something people can actually take away, which is good. The next Q&A question we have is from Samantha Hollenhurst, and she says, how would you go about getting those Hill internships at American University? Like, where are those applications?
So we have like an intern person. We have an intern person, career services helps. So that's a whole separate department. And I'm in the School of Public Affairs, so we have people that makes those connections. But also, it's quite common for some of your teachers will be people from the Hill, right? One of my friends, I got him a job. He teaches a class, but he's also like up on the Hill in this fancy position. I don't even remember his title, but it's super fancy. But the point is, he teaches, and so like if he gets a really great student, and they're like, oh, I really want to intern, he'll hook them up, right? So it can come through your teachers, connections with your professors, rather. Professor connections, the intern person in your school or career services, or just a Google search. But there are a whole bunch of ways to get. It's not just one path. That's a great question, and people do it as early as like freshman year. Like people are like, internships are like, it's not like other institutions will be like, oh, you can intern when you're a junior. AU is not like that. It's like because we're in DC, and I'm sure the Georgetown and George Washington University and George Mason University, I just call them the Georges. I'm sure they're all similar because we're all in the same area. Like you don't have to like wait like other places because there's abundance of opportunity. But again, start early because you want a paid opportunity.
This is true. Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, taking advantage of the fact that your work is not just for free and like you deserve to be compensated, especially early on, like you've been mentioning, and starting that so that way when you're ready to actually get a real job, you're prepared is very important. So thank you for that. I think I will just make another note. If anybody has any more questions they would like to ask, please submit them now. But I'm going to start wrapping up everything. There's one last question that we do want to ask though, which is where do we stay in contact with you?
So for those of you who don't know, which you guys probably know, but academics love Twitter. We love it. Academic Twitter is just as popping as Black Twitter. Which I don't know who's Black on here, but that's also popping. So you can always find me on Twitter. All my handles are the same. It's Talisa J. Carter. My Instagram, professional Instagram, that's public, Talisa J. Carter, PhD, I think that one is. Then I have a website. It's just tjcphd.com. So but they're all connected. Find me on one place, LinkedIn. Find me on one place, you find me on all places, because they're all interconnected. So LinkedIn, Twitter, my site, or Instagram. Any of those things are fine. I welcome your questions, guys, because I also realize, and this is what I tell my students, is actually doctors are only 1% to 2% of the population. Brown doctors, less than 1% of the population. Brown female doctors, even less than that. And so if you have a question, I encourage you to just ask it. It doesn't need to be properly worded. I can't read them myself, so I don't care about typos. I would rather you get the question out. And it's also great practice for college, because what a lot of students do too is they don't go to office hours. They treat professors like we're like, oh, it's so scary, but so amazing. And it's a really weird place to be, but I promise you, every single profession you have is a real person who you can just ask a question. And so you can get that practice in now if you do have a question about anything. And I mean anything that we covered, but if not, that's fine too.
Okay, sounds good. And we do actually have one last question. And they have asked, what are your thoughts on the current discussion of prison reform? This is like a loaded question, I know.
It is. So I think that individually, people and organizations, generally, if you talk about, like, if I talk to Urban Institute, I'm part of them, talk to Brookings, part of them. State Department, I did something for them a couple weeks ago. Everybody individually is very sincere, but we're very siloed, and it makes us ineffective. We're siloed for a lot of different reasons. A lot of times it's money and resources and politics, particularly in DC. Do I think reform is possible? Yes. Do I think that it would be easier if money wasn't involved? Yes. If we were trying to reform based on what's right and not what's profitable or where our money is tied to, it would be a lot easier. And so I think being in a capitalistic society where prison, institutions of higher education have stock in prison, right? So it's a reality of that situation. And so the way money works and the way criminal justice works in this country, if we could decouple them, I do think reform would be a smoother path for us. But that's not happening. And so we have to contend with a lot of different things. Do I think reform is possible? Yeah, that's why I'm in the field, right? That's why I do the work. That's why I go to prison so often. Went to prison in Vermont, like last month, go to prison again soon. Always there to talk to people and also because it's really important, again, for me not to just, I'm writing a book now, but we're more than books. Words won't do it, guys. Got to experience stuff. And so that's why I still go back, always go back. So it's possible, but it's complicated. And that's a reality that I think a lot of people get frustrated by. And I get that is frustrating, but it doesn't mean we lose hope. So it's a really good question.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is everything, and I do want to be mindful of everybody's time. So I will end it off. I'm just going to put an evaluation link really quick in the chat. If everyone is able to fill that out, please do so. Can let us know how we can improve for the future. And thank you so much again, Dr. Carter, for joining us today. We will send a follow-up email with all of the links in order to stay in contact with her. So if you're interested, check that out. But thank you so much for joining us again.
All right, thanks, guys. Have great days.
Thank you.
Bye.